watching NotesIn9.
Hello, and welcome to NotesIn9. I'm David Leedy. Episode 83, XPages Dynamic View Control, Part 2, Adding Dynamic Views to the Layout Control. Okay, before we get into the show, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some XPages resources that I provide. And I might start doing this a little more often because I'm still finding a lot of people who aren't finding my stuff as well as they should, and they still use YouTube, and I don't really publish much to YouTube anymore, and it's not really a focus of mine currently. And if it is or should be, please leave a comment. But obviously, the main site is NotesIn9.com itself. Now, that is currently a blog, and I understand that blogs do kind of age out where my shows don't, and I'm still working on that, and I am actually making progress on that. So, because my stuff doesn't fit well into a blog, I now have index.notes9.com, which is really the xpages.tv site, though I'm going to stop using that name at some point to try and prevent confusion and stuff like that. So on index.notes9.com, you can get to all the shows by episode number, which is probably the best way to just find an older show. And I've got the titles there, and I try to keep my titles fairly generic to the topic on hand. I don't really have fun with the titles. It's hopefully a good idea of a good example of what that show is about. You can also sort on that site currently by episode number. You can sort by contributor and see everything from a particular contributor. So for instance, this show is 83, and it's the second part of a show Paul did a little while ago. I believe 79. I'm not sure. So if you wanted to easily find the first show in this series, because this is labeled Part 2, go to by contributor, find Paul Calhoun, and it'll be there. So that's the index site that I provide, and that's really the best way to find older shows, I think. I also have cheatsheet.notes9.com, which has also been called xpagescheatsheet.com, though that's going to probably go away from a marketing perspective, and it's just going to be cheatsheet.notes9.com. And there you can download and print cheat sheets. So we've got at least, I think there's 2 cheat sheets right now. The original one, which is just kind of like the overall XPages getting started, which you can print on 11 by 17 or 8.5 by 11. And then there's the social tool cheat sheet if you're getting into the social tools and stuff like that. That's the one that I had help from a lot of great IBMers. There's also a link there to an online URL cheat sheet. Okay, that one's more of a beta because it's freaking ugly. But there's good examples there of if you want to work with URLs with XPages and stuff like that. Good examples of, I've got like the code there and what it does and stuff like that. And you can also download a demo application, which is the cheat sheet site itself. So there's a lot of examples there that I use in some of my shows. And there's also a database called the Fake Names Database, which just has a bunch of names that I used a name generator to do. So it's all fake data and stuff like that. But it's better than the address book in some ways because it has phone numbers and even credit card stuff. And fake credit cards, of course, don't get nuts here, and stuff like that. So again, these are the main resources that I have out for you. So try to use those instead of YouTube, because again, I have not published too much on a YouTube in a while. That may or may not change, but I'm never going to focus on YouTube. I'm always going to focus on trying to improve things through here. So anyway, okay, second thing I wanted to ramble on about before we get into the meat of the show is scoped variables, because I am getting a lot of contributors on these days, and I'm very thankful for the contributors, but sometimes they do things differently, so I wanted to make sure we didn't have any confusion on these scoped variables. So when you're dealing with scoped variables, you've got 4 scopes, right? You've got application, which has a long lifespan and is available to everybody. So that's almost like a profile document, kind of think of that. Session scope is a long lifespan, but it's individual to the user. So that's kind of like a user-specific profile document in a way. Though there's no documents involved. These are just all in-memory objects. That's just referencing to classic Notes client dev. Then there's view scope, which is a variable that basically lives for the entire life of the page and survives refreshes typically for a particular user. And then there's request scope, which is so short I don't even know what to do with it, so I've almost never used it. And if someone can explain to me how to use it, that would be great. But the meat of what I want to talk about here is populating them and getting them, because there's 2 ways to do it. There's kind of like the long form notation, and then there's the shorter dot notation. So you can populate a session scope variable with session scope dot put, var name and then the value, or you could just do session scope dot var name equals the value. Okay, I personally like to use puts. Gets are the same way. You could use dot get, or you can use the shorter dot notation. I like to use dot gets. Why do I like to use dot gets? Well, and dot puts because it's a little more to type, and programmers never want to do that. Well, maybe someday you're going to use a var name that matches up with a method for session scope, and that might cause you a problem. That's probably the biggest reason. So if you actually bump into an actual method name, I mean, session scope or all the scopes are basically just maps. So they do have some methods other than puts and gets. I also like it because you're dealing with Java beans and stuff like that. You're now starting to talk about getters and setters. So there is extra typing sometimes in these different languages now that they don't always have this shortcut dot notation. So I like to type them out. In this show coming up, I saw, which made me think of this. I've been wanting to do this for a while, but it made me think of this as Paul uses put to populate it, but to read he just uses the short dot notation. And whatever Paul says about XPages overrides anything I say about XPages because he's Paul. But either way work. I just prefer puts and gets myself. Okay, now whatever Paul says about barbecue does not necessarily override what I say about barbecue, no matter what he says. Okay, anyway, so also what I like to do is prefix your scope variables to keep them unique. So I always try to prefix mine with VS for view scope or SS for session scope, etc. So for example, I would have something like var my var equals view scope get VS my var. Okay, so that's why when I'm looking at the code, I can always say, always know what scope I'm dealing with. And this has burnt me before, where I had a scoped variable the same name as my local variable, and it just something didn't work. And I don't know if that's a universal it doesn't work, or if it was just something the way I was doing something at the time or so. So if you keep everything unique, then you never have to deal with it and learn that lesson. So that's just my 2 cents on that. Okay, so getting back into the show, we've got Paul Calhoun on, and Paul is from Notes Solutions, and he's a great teacher. He's a great XPage developer, and he's a wonderful speaker at a lot of the different conferences, and he really is a specialist in training and mentoring. So if you're inclined and you want some extra help, and you can't get the help that you want from a Stack Overflow or the XPages forum or just Googling or so, then I would say talk to Paul, and I'm sure he can work something out to be a little more available to you in a mentoring solution. And that is a great way to learn, because then you're talking about your stuff and you're getting help from an expert. So that's one of the things he does. So don't be afraid to engage him in that kind of a relationship, and it might be a win-win for both of you. Okay, so that being said, this is the second part of a demo that Paul did on using the making dynamic views, and in this show he's going to add them to more like the XPages layout control and the One UI application layout and stuff like that to make them look a little prettier and everything like that. So with that being said, let's go to the demo.
Hello, this is Paul Calhoun with NetNet Solutions Unlimited, and I'm here with my second video for David Leedy's NotesIn9 Drive to 99 effort. In my first video, I did one view to display them all that showed how to use the dynamic view panel from the extension library. And I'm back with this video to show you how you can then take that and wrap that up inside the layout control. So without further ado, we're going to kind of jump right into it. In the first video that I did, again, we had a sample database that we used that allowed you to go in and use a single view control. We called it joints. And that single XPage view control then allowed you to display n number of views inside of the application. So instead of creating one view XPage for every view in the database, then you could just simply go in and display them all through a single XPage interface with the dynamic view panel. And now what we want to do is we want to wrap that up inside the extension library's layout control. And the layout control is something that David's had videos on before, and there's lots of information out there. It's obviously covered in the IBM Press book that was put out by the XPages gurus, the XPages extension library. But I wanted to give you a walkthrough and example of how to actually set that up through there. So in this particular example, we're going to use the same database that we used before, and we're going to borrow the design elements. And again, we're only going to have two controls, really, two major XPages, the xlib joints and the xlib joint, the one to display the documents and then the one to display the dynamic views. And then we're going to have several custom controls. We're going to have the layout region, and then also the Navigator itself. And so pictures being worth 1,000 words, let's go ahead and just run this so you can kind of see where we're headed with this. So we'll load this up, and again, it's going to be the layout interface. So using the One UI v2.1 purple, we're actually seeing that we've got our graphic, we've got the title bar going across the top. When we click on the different views, then again we're displaying the one X page every time, and it's simply going to then go in and display that particular view dynamically using the dynamic view control. If you see over here on the left where it looks like things are duplicated every time I click on them, I actually did that on purpose. I wanted to show you how you could set up this view navigator two different ways. One is just using the standard view navigator, and the second one is actually then using an actual bean. So you can make that just a little bit more dynamic. I know that we've talked a lot about using beans in the Java code here in these particular videos and video series. So again, I kind of wanted to show you both of those. So let's jump back to the Navigator. So to implement this, we start by developing our custom controls. And we go ahead and we go into the Navigator custom control first. And when we create the Navigator custom control, then this is simply going to be a list of navigation items. And those navigation items are going to be the interface that you just saw me demonstrate. So you can go in and you can build this by individually listing out all the different views that you want to have. And that's that first interface on top that you saw. So in order to enable that, then I'm simply going in and saying, okay, I'm going to add a basic node value, and I'm going to give it a label, and that's what shows up in the browser. And then I'm also going to go in and say, when they click on it and submit the value, I'm passing in the name of the view's alias. So we're picking that up, and then we're going to set that equal to a session scope variable. And if we open up our selected value here, what this is going to do is says, if the selected view is joints, return true. And that's what allows us to see that that was the selected view in our Navigator there when we're using the basic leaf nodes there. Now the other way to get this to work is we're going in and putting in the Navigator itself, we have some events, and in that particular event we're going again and saying, putting our session scope variable, and we're getting the submitted value. In that case, that was the on-click value that we just looked at, and then we're doing a redirect to page, which is the extension library joints XSP, that particular X page. And that's what's going to allow us to then go in and redirect, and display using one X page, but being able to do that regardless of the number of views that we have inside of the application itself. And last but not least, here in the Navigator, just while we're here, we'll talk about this. We have also a managed bean node. And in the managed bean node, very similar to the dynamic view panels bean that we use, I've created this Java code called the bean tree node. And what that is going to do is allow me to use Java code to display the list of items that are available in the Navigator instead of hard coding them as these individual tree nodes or basic nodes that you see here. And again, that code is not complex at all. If you go in and we want to take a look at this, then in this particular code, this is the bean tree node, then we're simply going in and importing our values. And inside those packages, those are the classes that we're going to use. You do have to extend this basic node list, which is what each one of those things are. I'm pulling in my faces context because I need to be able to read the session scope variables out of the map that's contained there. So I simply pick up the context, and then we say, being tree nodes, and we simply call this add leaf method. And you would call that method every time for each individual item that you wanted to add to your Navigator. And this is simple text, so we're passing in the text values, and that's what you'll see in the Navigator. And then I'm also passing in this map so that I can set its selection property. In the add leaf itself, we're going to create a new node. We're going to set its label that was passed in from the previous method. And then we're going in and saying, if the label that we're passing in is equal to whatever the selected value was, then that's where we're submitting that, setting that submit value. So that was identical to when we added the basic leaf node and set that property for submit value. And then to get the selections to work correctly, then I'm also setting just a variable called clicked value. And then down below, I set the node selected. So, if the session scope variable is equal to the view alias and clicked value equals, this value that I set up here, that's what allows me to actually set the selection property inside of the Navigator there. And that's about it for the Navigator itself. Again, it's not complex, so it's a pretty limited amount of code, and then it's highly duplicable. You can use this for any Navigator, and it shows you two different ways that you can basically accomplish the same thing. Once we have our Navigator control, then we can go and we can create our layout. And in the layout custom control, this is the one where you're going to go in, and in the application layout, you're going to have the defined layout, and you can add as many of the components as you want or need. For example, I'm not going to actually use the right column, but I've dragged my Navigator into this left column. And then I went ahead and said, okay, what I want to do is enable my drop target for the middle and the right columns. So this way, as a custom control, when I add that to a brand new X page, then it's automatically got the Navigator on it, and then I can simply go in and drop values into the left and right columns if I choose to. So what I did then was go and create these X pages. So I created these two X pages, xtlib joints and xtlib joint, and it was very, very simple from that point. All I needed to do then was go and add the actual custom control that was my barbecue layout. I added that custom control. It already had the Navigator on it, and in the faces middle area, then all I did was put a panel in that area, and then I was able to go to my original X page joints, and I was able to just say, okay, what I want to do is copy this particular table or this panel that I already had. So if you have existing XPage applications that you're migrating into the One UI layout and using the new layout component, then you don't have to recreate the wheel. You don't have to go in and recreate all of those controls and objects from scratch. Simply go to your existing XPage, copy that content over, and put it right in. So now I have one X page that's the original dynamic view panel, but then it's simply going to go in and again allow, when I set the session scope variables, it'll display whatever view was selected. And then once again, I also have the xlib joint, which is the one that's going to display all the content. And I did the exact same thing. All I did was go and get the existing content from my joint X page and drop that right in there. So once you have your layout and your navigation working, then the conversion of a traditional XPage application over into the extension library in the layout region becomes quite simple. And now, because we've eliminated the need to have to create an XPage for every view, then you can literally have one XPage for every form, and then one XPage to display all of the views in your application. And the end result of that, again, is going to look like this. When you open that up in your browser, Firefox or Chrome, I looked at Firefox previously. So this is what it's going to look like in Chrome. Then you'll see that when you click on the values in the Navigator, it changes them. Oh, look, you'll notice that Good Barbecue outside of Texas, that view still displays no documents, regardless of what Mr. Leedy might want to lead y'all to believe. But then again, this gives you the best of both worlds. So you can go in and you can either use the basic leaf nodes, or then you can also use the actual bean control to dynamically create this list from underlying content and then manage that particular control. So that's pretty much it. That allows you to, again, migrate your existing XPages applications over to the extension library with the layout control and the Navigator, and then concentrate just really on that core content in the middle, and then reduce the number of overall design elements that you have to maintain. So I hope y'all enjoyed this. I hope this helps you in your development, and I look forward to talking to y'all in the next video.
And that's the demo. I thank Paul for coming on the show, and I really look forward to him coming back on. And if you have any questions for me, here's my contact information, and I thank you for your time.